Hi and welcome. I am Sabina Simonson, Outreach Services and Volunteer Coordinator for the Talbot County Free Library, and you are watching The Library Presents Tradition, Speed, and Grace, Chesapeake Bay Sailing Log Canoes. It's about the new book by John C. North II. And the person to introduce us to this book is no other than Pete Lesher, of course, of the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum. He has served there on the staff since 1991 and oversees museum collections, exhibitions, and programs. He graduated Lafayette College, holds an MA in History from Columbia University, and studied maritime history at Mystic Seaport's Munson Institute for American Maritime Studies. He also curated the Robert Degas Chesapeake exhibition, if you saw that, down at the Maritime Museum. Outside of work, he is elected to the Eastern Town Council. He serves as chairman of the St. Michael's Historic District Commission. And then, of course, his complete other thing that he likes to do, he sails. These babies. That's right. He is, his role is a ship tender on the Chesapeake Bay Sailing Log Canoe, the Island Bird, which is, I think, the oldest one. It was built in 1882. Now, Pete has not been there since 1882. And if that's not quite enough, if you ever get a chance to watch TV and watch Mysteries of the Museum, there is an episode where Pete's going to talk about the town that fooled the British, that whole story about St. Michael's. I caught that on TV, and he's got such a distinctive voice that I actually heard him speak and ran into the room like, oh my God, this is Pete on national television. So we are very lucky to have him amongst us from national television to the Talbot County Free Library, Pete Lesher.
Thank you, Sabina.
You're welcome, Pete.
It was a delight to be able to collaborate with Judge North, the author of this book, and with Mark Castelli, the picture editor for this book, in producing this. We've been talking about doing such a book for years. I can remember sailing log canoes back in the 1990s, and the book that was the authority on log canoes had been published in 1933 and reprinted in 1963. And a few things have happened since then in the way of log canoe racing. So we wanted to get this out. Several people had intended to do such a book, had talked about it, but never really got to the point of turning the book out. For Judge North to do this, it is a bit of a personal memoir because he's been so involved in log canoe racing now for 70 seasons on the Chesapeake. He started as a teenager, and this season he has still been sailing at the helm of the Island Bird, the canoe that I sail on. So this has been a collaboration. It's been a labor of love, and the book has 5 narrative chapters, and we start off with a chapter entitled simply "What is a log canoe?" And he starts out explaining that while what you may think of as a rather crude dugout, that the Chesapeake log canoe is a somewhat different animal, developed certainly from the dugout, but with multiple logs. Here you can see a cross section produced by log canoe builder Bill Hanlon that appears in the book of a 5 log canoe, and you can see that shaped by broadaxe and adze and joined together with iron drifts, earlier wooden trunnels. There's an awful lot that ends up in wood chips by the time you're finished constructing a canoe. But in fact, they're named log canoes because they are canoes. That is, they are shallow draft boats that are pointed at both ends, bow and stern, and that are constructed of, in this case, multiple logs. Log canoes, as he goes on to explain, had their origin as workboats, as oystermen's boats, tonging for oysters on the waters of the Chesapeake, on the Miles River, on the Choptank River, on the Chester River, and elsewhere on the bay. Typically by 1 or 2 operators, and these were typically fairly small boats of say 20 to 30 feet in length. This is one coming into St. Michael's Harbor at the end of the day in the early 20th century. But even from early on, the watermen who had these log canoes, the oystermen, did race them. We have the first recorded log canoe race goes back all the way to 1859. It was on the Miles River in St. Michael's. And what happened was what typically happens with one of these things, which is that a young gentleman by the name of Thomas H. Oliver, who later fought for the Confederate Army, bought himself a new log canoe, and he was sure that his boat was the fastest on the bay, or at least on the river, and so he put up a silver cup challenge to all the fellow sailors on the Miles River to a race. And they started at Deepwater Point off of near St. Michael's, and they sailed clear out towards Tillman Point to what was then called the Bugby Buoy, around and back, a distance of about 9 miles each direction, 18 miles. And when on the appointed day in June of 1859, as they were coming back, indeed, the first boat back across the line was Thomas Oliver's own boat. And the boat that followed him most closely was actually the smallest of the fleet, a canoe named the Douglas. And at the presentation on the shoreline following the race, Thomas Oliver presented the cup to the owner of the Douglas. There supposedly was a tin cup for the last place, but the silver cup went to the owner of the Douglas for having done such a noble job and coming so close to Thomas Oliver's much larger canoe. That trophy still survives. And it is the one here on the right side of this picture. It is on exhibit at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum. One that's almost as old is still in the hands of the family that won it up on the Chester River the following year in 1860. So this was an idea that got going, and there were log canoe races in the 1860s and the 1870s on Chester River, on Miles River, on Tread Avenue River. And there are some accounts of these early races that are part of that, an early chapter in this book about racing and the yacht clubs, the early accounts of races. And indeed, in 1885, a club was formed specifically to promote the sport of log canoe racing. It is now the oldest yacht club on the bay, the Chesapeake Bay Yacht Club right here at Easton, the Chesapeake's landlocked yacht club, if you will, because it's in downtown Easton. And a lot of the early members, the founding members of Chesapeake Bay Yacht Club, in fact, sort of adopted as the club's boat the Chesapeake Bay log canoe. So many of the early members, even if they did not sail themselves, they owned them, they campaigned these boats, and log canoe racing became a more or less annual affair beginning in the mid-1880s. Before that, the records were a little sporadic about the frequency of these races. Some years there was one or none, some years two or more races. But when the Chesapeake Bay Yacht Club got this going, they put on an annual regatta, and log canoes always became, or for many years, I should say, we'll get to that when it stopped, became a part of this annual regatta. And those regattas were quite elegant affairs. Frankly, even by the turn of the century, the Eastern Shore was something of a cultural backwater. There really wasn't that much going on, and so when somebody put on something like a regatta, particularly with a party afterwards, people turned out. And in fact, in some cases it seems that thousands of people turned out. And if you've ever watched a sailboat race, that's a remarkable thing indeed. They don't always move very quickly, particularly in light Chesapeake summer airs. The log canoes, despite this yacht club sponsorship and some of the patrician owners of these boats, they were oysterman boats at first, and so the log canoe racing grew up with sort of blue-collar racing traditions. They came up with a rather crude measurement system of, they measured the length of every boat, and they understood, of course, that boats with a longer waterline could theoretically go faster, and so they developed a handicap system of 6 seconds per foot of length of the canoe per mile of the course. And in modified form, we actually still use that measurement system today. It doesn't matter what the particular shape of the boat is. It doesn't matter how much sail you carry, how tall your masts are, or anything like that. We still use a handicap system of 6 seconds per foot per mile. And here, the starting sequence, of course, they didn't do modern sailboat starts as we would do today with timed starts. No boats, of course, in those days would have carried stopwatches on board, all mechanical affairs. If they capsized, that would be the end of the stopwatch. And so what they did is they would fire off a gun, and the boats would start from in many cases, from a standing start, as you see in this photograph here, with the canoes standing in the shallow water in what I believe to be Fogg's Cove of St. Michael's, ready for the signal to go. Fortunately, it's fairly light air, so they can have all the sails out and be standing there without peril of capsize or of taking off without the crew. This is a tradition, actually, that we're trying to revive, the standing start race with the Bartlett Cup, the last log canoe race of the season. It's been our intention to do this the past 2 years, but we haven't gotten one of these off yet. There were certainly trophies awarded and championships vied for. This is the judge's own boat, long before his family owned it, the Island Bird. Just after the turn of the century, about 1903, we believe, and she's flying a banner from her foremast that says "Champion." And there were 4 pictures taken of this. The banner is available, is legible in another view. A couple of interesting things are going on in this photograph. By this time, the Island Bird, built in 1882, never was built as an oysterman's boat. It was built as a racing boat. So the logs were carved even thinner to make it a little bit lighter, and you see a few innovations going on here. One, because the rig is large enough, a couple of the crew members are out on springboards out on the windward side. You can see them out beyond the windward rail of the boat with these loose boards tucked under the washboards. This is what we still do today, and on every tack we need to move those boards to the other side and the crew with them. You'll see another feature up there. The jib, the forwardmost sail, has a club, the full length of it, and it pivots off the end of the bowsprit. As these sails grew larger, of course, in heavy air, it would be an awful lot of force on the sheets to haul that sail in. But by creating this balanced jib, it was quite innovative, so that in fact there was less strain for the jib tender. This innovation was created in the 1880s by a then new sailmaker who arrived in Oxford by the name of David Pritchard, who came up with who was asked to build sails for log canoes, and in fact it was when he passed on in 1937. The successor to his business was an African American sailmaker that some of you may remember by the name of Downs Curtis. His equipment is in the Maritime Museum's collection. So this is, in all likelihood, a suit of sails by David Pritchard, an Englishman who was on deep sea ships and came ashore at Oxford, set up shop there. In the 19-teens, the watermen all got small internal combustion engines for their boats, and they all converted their boats to power. Took the sailing rigs out of them, took the centerboards out of them, and put a one-lunger engine in them, and continued to go out and oyster in these boats. Well, this really put it into log canoe racing, because these weren't sailboats anymore, or there were very few left around. The Island Bird was one that was never converted to power. She remained a sailboat throughout her existence. And to revive log canoe racing, and so log canoe racing died out in the 19-teens. Simply not enough boats to field it. The Baltimore Sun attempted to revive log canoe racing in 1921 by creating a log canoe class in their Chesapeake Bay Championship workboat races. But after 2 years, they decided that sailing log canoes weren't really workboats anymore. They were simply yachts, and so they discontinued that. And a new club was formed to revive log canoe racing, that being the Miles River Yacht Club in St. Michael's. And one of the organizers of the club, Bill Green, went around and raised by popular subscription enough money for a big silver bowl that if you won this bowl 3 times, you would take this home to motivate people to get back into log canoe racing, to convert some of these workboats, these motor workboats, back into sailing boats. And he got Governor Albert C. Ritchie, the popular 4-term governor of Maryland, to sort of lend his name to it, so it became known as the Governor's Cup. And in the first year, it was won by the Magic, a boat that had just in 1924 been converted back to sail. The following 3 years, Bill Green won the trophy himself, 1928, 1929, 1930. And so he got to take the cup home. But he said, I don't want to end log canoe racing, and I certainly don't want to take this cup out of contention. So he donated the cup back to the Miles River Yacht Club as a perpetual trophy. And they said, what we're going to do is we'll make replica trophies for people to take home. And for a number of years, those replica trophies looked like miniature versions of the Governor's Cup. And we have one that was given just last year to the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, engraved just like the Governor's Cup. And on the back, it indicates it was won by the Noddy, sailed by Oliver Duke in 1937. This was intended, I think, if Noddy won it multiple times, to get engraved multiple times. The Noddy would only get one replica. But in fact, it would be years and years later, the 1960s, I believe, before Noddy, in fact, won the cup again. And by that time, this trophy was no longer with the owner of the then owner of the Noddy. So we continue to race for the Governor's Cup today. The Governor's Cup did something else. It inspired the construction, for the first time in a generation, of new log canoes. And in 1931, 4 years after the Governor's Cup was started, a local antique dealer and funeral parlor director, John D. Williams, whose establishment was where the Academy Art Museum is today, went to a local log canoe builder of Tillman Island, John B. Harrison, and asked him to build him a new log canoe. John B. Harrison produced this beautiful, very innovative log canoe, one with a transom stern for the first time. Hadn't been seen on the log canoes before. Williams was an interesting character. He, of course, had the funeral parlor where the Academy Art Museum, and the other side was his antique shop. So he would bury you, and then he would sell off your estate, using your furniture. But he had the wherewithal to buy a fancy new log canoe and put Egyptian cotton sails on it and so forth. And when this new canoe came out, it was immediately controversial. You know, this is the influence of money in sport. Issues that seem to recur in every sport in every generation, and certainly this became the dominant issue of log canoe sailing in the 1930s. And Bill Green was really offended when this new canoe was put out to be to race, and they decided that the deed of gift for when he donated the cup back to the Chesapeake to the Miles River Yacht Club was that it must be sailed for by traditional canoes. And with this transom stern, JD was not seen as a traditional canoe, so she was banned from sailing. Well, the following year, another owner, A. Johnson Grimes Jr., no, Sr., Jr. was the one who built the Tidewater Inn, but his father had another one of these canoes built from the same half model, by the same builder, by John B. Harrison. And here is the boat, the Flying Cloud, built in 1932. And for the first 2 years, she was virtually indistinguishable in photos from the JD. Same size, same suit of sails, same transom stern. And here she is under construction. 5 logs in the winter of 1931 to 1932. And here you can see kind of how those logs are going together. Those 5 logs carved to shape and ready to get fastened side to side. For 2 years, Flying Cloud raced, JD raced. They did a lot of match races against each other, and they were in fact well matched boats. And in the book, the judge describes how Johnson Grimes managed to lure the skipper of the JD over to his boat and created all kinds of controversy and of course, not only were these expensive new boats with expensive, good Egyptian cotton sails, but look at the crews, all outfitted in uniforms. There were even rumors that they were paid crews, the influence of money in sport. We don't even know which canoe this is. It is either JD or Flying Cloud, sailing downwind in a way we don't do anymore, wing and wing, dead downwind. You can see the springboards are not out to either side. They are centered, the crew's entirely in the boat. This is what we would consider this a very tender point of sail. And we would not do this today, at least not intentionally. Other builders and other new canoes got into this as well. A builder from Royal Oak by the name of Oliver Duke, who in fact won this cup with the Naughty, with this canoe, the Naughty, built the Naughty and began campaigning her in 1933. And so a smaller canoe than the JD and the Flying Cloud. And you can see that she was an innovative boat too. Look at that foremast and mainmast. Incidentally, I should have mentioned earlier, you know, you might recognize, if you're a sailor, you might recognize these boats as ketches. And ketches have a mainmast, the taller mast forward, a mainmast, and a mizzen. But to a Chesapeake waterman, there's no such thing as a mizzenmast. If you have a sailing rig with two masts, you use schooner terminology. It is a foremast and a mainmast, even though the foremast is the taller one. And so Naughty was put out with these curved masts, this curved foremast and mainmast, to get a little extra sail area up there at the top of the mast. And she was famous for this. The judge describes in his book how this was a bit of a design flaw. It in fact was a little fragile, and the design flaw actually not only had curved masts, but it had curved spreets, those spars that are in place of a boom down lower. They were in a wishbone fashion, sort of like you would see on a windsurfer sail today. And the design flaw was that they were through-bolted through the mast, and that was a weak point. And so it was in the Miles River Regatta in 1951, a very breezy day, that Naughty dismasted, double dismasted, broke both masts with a loud crack. The judge said he was sailing more or less alongside of her, not too far away when this happened, and the photographer caught it shortly after. This is Chestertown photographer Constance Stewart Larrabee, who was on the scene for that particular regatta. So the judge, the author in this describes what is a log canoe, describes racing the yacht clubs, and describes these big log canoes. There are further chapters on. The last narrative chapter in the book is really a personal narrative of how his family acquired the Island Blossom in the late 1940s, 1947. A few years later, the Island Bird in 1947, the Island Blossom in about 1951, and then the JD in about 1970. And this became actually the family now, his son Dan North is the half owner of yet a fourth log canoe, the Persistence, for the past 2 seasons. And they have a home right next to the Miles River Yacht Club that they named Canoe Harbor, that sort of serves as a home base for now all 4 of these log canoes, where we will see activity, weather permitting, once again this weekend. The balance of the book is sort of little mini histories, profiles of each of the surviving log canoes, and he goes through them sort of in sail number order, which is not the order in which they were built, not any number. The numbers were drawn out of a hat in the early 1970s. So those numbers were more or less, those sail numbers were more or less randomly assigned. So number 4, Island Bird, the judge's own boat, sails. This is the judge at the helm and we're maxed out. This is as hairy as it gets, but this is what the canoes are designed to do. We heel over, we spill a little bit of breeze, and we go. Actually, these boats will exceed their theoretical hull speed, which I spoke with the naval architect about this. and always thought a displacement boat like this, you can only drive it so fast. They have a formula that a boat can go 1.34 times the square root of its waterline length. Beyond that, you add more horsepower and it just makes bigger waves. Well, apparently if you add enough horsepower, enough sails, enough wind, you can actually exceed that theoretical hull speed, and these boats do seem to do that under ideal conditions from time to time. That's your speaker. At the forward end of the Island Bird, tending the jib. This is number 5, the Billy P. Hall. Another old boat, 1903. We have a trophy that we sail for the same weekend as we sail the Governor's Cup that was presented by the judge's father, John C. North, back in the 1930s. The trophy was a sterling replica of the Island Bird, and it was awarded, it was given to really preserve the old log canoes. And so he wanted to have it as a trophy only for the canoes that were built before 1917. They created this cutoff date. And later on, they created another cup for the new boats, the boats that were built after 1917. We still have these 2 cups. The fleets, actually this year, we had more boats sailing for among the old fleet than among the new fleet. And of course, you now need to have a boat that's 101 years old or older to qualify as an old boat. Those boats built in the 1930s, those are new boats. Mystery was out sailing again this year. This is a photograph that appears in the profile of Mystery in the book. Mystery sailed hard. She is another big boat that was built right about the same time as the Flying Cloud. John D. Williams, who had the JD built, also had the Mystery built. The Flying Cloud later was altered to have a sharp stern so she could sail for the Governor's Cup, and she won. But John D. Williams did not want to have the JD altered. She was too beautiful to do that. She remains unaltered today. And so he had a second log canoe built, the Mystery, a traditional, if you will, large but traditional boat, sharp at both ends, so that she could sail for the Governor's Cup, although it took her until, I believe, the 1960s to actually win the Governor's Cup. Now owned by Fran and Susie Schauber up in Chestertown. And you can see there's a lot of strain on this rig. That's a lot of weight out there on the springboards, and of course with the mast primed the boat apart in the other direction. Mystery again, with the crew out in the springboards. Sail number 9, Island Blossom, is Island Blossom has become the boat to beat in the fleet. She is the 9-year reigning. This year will make 10, and it doesn't look like she can be dethroned. High Point champion, the overall fleet champion for the season, sailed by Corbin Penwell, owned by the North family, and just an amazing boat. She was the boat to beat. She was built in 1892. She was the boat to beat in the 1890s. She won the Anchorage Cup right around the turn of the century, another cup where you had to win it three times in 3 years in order to take the cup home. That cup is still owned by the family that owned her down in Oxford. She was the boat again to beat in the 1980s when Doug Hanks sailed her and won what was then a record 6 times in a row High Point championship. And once again, she is the championship boat. Amazing that this old boat is still the dominant boat of the fleet. In fact, the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum has been contracted to build a new log canoe this coming winter. And the naval architect and the owner who have engaged the museum to do this are specifically trying to build a blossom killer, a boat to beat this canoe.
Good luck.
The book is made richer by a number of paintings of all of these active log canoes that were executed by Chestertown artist Mark Castelli, who himself sails in these log canoes, who himself photographs these log canoes, typically from aboard another log canoe. Sometimes he's on a chase boat, but many times he's aboard one of the canoes. And in fact, what you see in the lower left-hand corner of this painting is the deck of the JD. So he was aboard the JD when he took the photo that he then painted, this painting of the Island Blossom, entitled Beyond Redemption, because in fact, she's about to capsize. And when these boats do go over, that's game over for the day. We don't typically recover from that and get back in the race. It's happened twice. With the Island Blossom, happened back just after the turn of the century, where she capsized off Claiborne, re-rigged, very calm day, got back in the race. The other boats had not finished the race yet, and she still finished the race. I witnessed that happen again back about 10 or 15 years ago on the Chester River. Another flat, calm day where they had time to recover while the rest of us were just drifting around, not moving anywhere. Persistence is a boat that has recently changed hands. This is the one that Judge North's son Dan recently acquired a half interest in. But she was in fact the High Point champion for another 6-year period from the late 1990s through the early 2000s. Skippered, as you see in this painting, by Tyler Johnson of Chestertown, another Mark Castelli image, really showing just the power of these boats, really keyed up. She's a fast boat. This image by Guy Gurney is actually the frontispiece of the book, opposite the title page. And here you see Corbin Penwell at the helm. He's now the one who commands the Island Blossom. Roger Pickall tending the foremast, and you can see they're really heeled over and going hard. Again, the photographer took his camera out aboard the JD, and clearly, because this picture survived, the camera didn't take a bath that particular day. There have been a few cameras that have gone overboard under these circumstances. Island Lark seen centered here with her staysail up. This is the whole fleet here is off the wind, having rounded the windward mark. In a race down in Oxford, you can see that they've put this staysail, sort of an asymmetrical sail between the two masts, raised from the mainmast as they're going off the wind. What we do with these now is, of course, we go at an angle downwind. We don't go dead downwind, and so we don't see these boats going wing and wing like you saw in that earlier black and white photograph. We rather take a series of jives, a series of angles as we go downwind. So Island Lark that you see in this painting is owned by the DuPont family. Tad DuPont, who successfully campaigned her for many years, even achieving the High Point Trophy and the Governor's Cup a number of times, has now turned this over to his daughter, Corey DuPont, and we've continued to see her out. She was out a couple of times this season as well. I've got quite a few pictures of Island Lark. Here you see her in the middle of a jibe with springboards out to both sides as they're bringing the sails across. And here you can see that they're maintaining that level boat as they go downwind and make that turn. The Island Lark crew out on their springboards. You can see that there is nothing to hang on to besides the plank itself, as some of you are well aware. Island Lark again. Every one of these boats has a tender, or they're well advised to, and we need this support typically to tow us out to the course, to tow us home, to rescue us if we get into trouble and capsize. We are even allowed, if somebody falls, if a crew member falls off the boat, for that tender, if we come up luff head to wind, don't make any forward progress in the course, for the tender to pick up that lost crew member and bring him back aboard. We do have humanitarian rules in the fleet that we must finish with all the crew with which we started. Must finish with all the equipment and crew. A boat in harbor is safe. A ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are for. This was Island Lark on the occasion of her centennial in 2001, and the DuPont owners Tad and Emmy DuPont put her in their mother's pool at Doncaster and had a bunch of former crew and current crew and friends of the long canoe fleet gathered for this big party to celebrate the boat's centennial. I had the occasion to ask Tad at one point, so what did your mother think of putting the boat in the pool? And Tad said, she was none too pleased. Which were probably her exact words. The Maritime Museum has played a very active role since about 1990 in promoting the sport of log canoe racing. We were given a boat in 1980. The former Cecilia May, another Oliver Duke-built boat. We campaigned it for a few years, and then she kind of got in rough condition. We reconditioned her in the winter of 1991, I guess it was, and got her racing, and she's been racing ever since then. They have adopted, as you can see, the emblem on their hats, the flying pig, because the joke in this crew is that that's when they will win a race, is when pigs fly. They keep a good sense of humor about it all. But the museum also has acquired a couple of other canoes. The very diminutive size, very small Marianne, just 22 feet on deck, too small to be competitive, really. About 4 years ago, we were given the Flying Cloud, and we're attempting to get her back out. We got rained out. We would have been sailing this past weekend, but got rained out with it. Hope to get back out next season. But we have campaigned her a bit. She's a big boat, needs a big crew to get together, ideally around 15, 16 people to crew such a big boat. And we actually built a log canoe about 3 seasons ago, the Bufflehead, an even smaller canoe, only about 20, 21 feet, which takes just a crew of just 4. Again, not very competitive, and will even only finish a race under ideal circumstances. But she's done that, and she's even beaten a few boats in her first several seasons. Now, things do go wrong from time to time in the log canoes. This was up on the Chester River when we had a mark set in a little too close to the shore in shallow water, and you can see there one canoe that has run aground and tripped up. The other one, the Silver Heel, you can see with sails out to both sides, looking rather tender. They did not survive. They went over as well. And so what happens when we do this? Here you can see the Island Bird. We have to de-rig her in the water. That is, take the sails off, take the masts out, take everything out. This is where the chase boat comes in. We need a place to pass all that. And then we get in with big buckets and bail her out. On the Island Bird, we're actually quite good at this, I'm sad to say. Here you can see us bailing her out. And then once bailed out, we can even re-rig. This was an occasion on a Saturday morning when we capsized just off the dock. And we managed to re-rig her out on the water. Now, notice how high in this first picture the bow is out of the water. And as we're stepping that foremast, and the crew starts to come forward, the bow goes down deeper and deeper into the water as we step that mast. You can see how deep that name is as we're setting this foremast. Entirely by hand. We've decided that it's safer to do it with a crane on the Flying Cloud, because that's a foremast that weighs probably something north of 400 pounds. Other things can go wrong. You get a flaw in the breeze. You can heel the windward, sweep people off the springboards. That's how people sometimes get separated. How crew gets separated from the boat. This is happening on the JD just after mark rounding. And I'll finish up with back to black and white. One of the super canoes, one of the gold platers, as the judge will call them, from the 1930s, the JD or the Flying Cloud, sailing another sail that you do not see today, the square sail. We've decided that actually that's not the fastest sort of sail. With that, I will thank you for your patience in listening to me, and with that, we'll wrap it up, and I can take questions.
Thank you so much, Pete. Fabulous. Thank you. copies, and one of them was signed by Judge North, of course, and given to us as a gift for the Maryland room. Keep us in mind for all your book needs. And if you've never seen the Law Canoes race, I beg of you, go out and look at them, because you can see them nowhere else in the entire world other than here. And I know that because I am on the chase boat all summer long, watch those races and loving it. We'll see you at the library. Bye-bye.